And you mentioned psychedelics there. Do we know if Carl Jung ever did them or was interested in them or his views on them?
So uh, I don't think so, and none of his writings suggest that he did. In fact, he was quite against the idea of using psychedelics for a few reasons. So, in his correspondence with a theologian and a pastor, Victor White, he writes about LSD in a way that really doesn't suggest that he really understood what the substance is. But in that correspondence, he says something quite interesting, which is almost suggestive that he didn't think that humans really deserved to touch upon these. You could define it as a divine realms that we didn't really deserve to have that kind of shortcut. And ultimately, he said that we don't need any more material that naturally comes through to us through intuition and our dreams, and that these are the gateway to the unconscious. And that's basically it. And I guess if you think about him and think about Red Book, you can see why he would have thought that, because he was clearly somebody who had this amazing sensitivity and ability to traverse into in imagination in a way that is quite unusual. So I don't think he was necessarily somebody who needed psychedelics. He was so in tune, but also he worked for that intunement because he would oftentimes go into isolation for extended periods of time. This was already, he died in 1960, so he would really go on for periods of time living in this tower in Bollingen where there was no electricity, no running water. So he was very much living close to the land and living a very simplistic life with no distractions, the kind of existence that many people today could only dream of. So I, the way in which I see it is that Jung didn't really need necessarily the psychedelics himself, and he was
Mm.
maybe somewhat arrogant about the potential of them to help human consciousness. But
Mm.
there's something really interesting that I found during my research around this topic, which I think a lot of people don't really know about, which is that there is there is an anecdote in somebody else's book. It's this child psychologist called Michael Fordham who visited Jung right before his death, and it's just a few sentences that he writes about it. He basically says that he had gone to visit Jung, and this was already at the point when this was just a few days before his death, and that Jung was there, and he was kind of looking a bit deranged, and nothing that he was saying was making much sense. And he was saying, so Michael Fordham writes that Jung was talking about LSD and its ability to lower the threshold of consciousness. And Michael Fordham, who wasn't necessarily somebody who was pro psychedelics, says that this was just completely nonsensical, and clearly at that point he had already lost his ability to reason and to think clearly. So I think it's really interesting that that few sentences about the days before Jung passed actually exists, even though it's not something that Jung himself wrote down, but it suggests that maybe right before he passed
Mm.
away, he died a few days later, he actually reconsidered the role of psychedelics, and maybe not even somebody like Jung, who had such a vision for psychology and human consciousness, could have actually foreseen the kind of reality in which we live now, some
Mm.
some 80, 90 years later, where we are constantly bombarded by information technology, and we don't sort of, our psyches are not at rest in ways that they were before. So therefore we just don't have the same kind of connection and access to our unconscious that
Mm.
I think people had back in the day. So that's that.
Mm. Yeah, that Carl Jung didn't need psychedelics, perhaps. He was almost even too connected to his unconscious.